Good afternoon, everyone. It's time for Mrs. Ballou Reads, and by request, we are going to read the last book that is inside Tumtum and Nutmeg, Adventures Beyond Nutmouse Hall, stories by Emily Bearn, pictures by Nick Price, and published by Hachette Book Company. And this book is called The Pirate's Treasure. Chapter 1. It was a fine May morning with not a scent of trouble in the air. The sort of morning Tumtum noted happily that bore the promise of a very uneventful day. He rose from his bed and set off for the kitchen, and the kitchen was a long way from the bedroom, for Nutmouse Hall was a big house with long corridors and lots of stairs. As he went, he remembered all the things he had to do. There was breakfast, lunch, and supper to eat, and a newspaper to read, and a nap to fit in. And that is a lot of events in a day that promises to be uneventful. Tumtum pressed on, eager to get started, but when he reached the kitchen, he found Nutmeg in a terrible fuss. "Something dreadful's happened," she cried. "What, dear?" Tumtum asked, sitting down at the table. Nutmeg often fussed, and usually about the silliest things, such as an upset vase or a broken mug. Even so, it struck Tumtum that this morning she looked more flustered than usual. "It's the children," she said miserably. "Why? Is one of them ill?" Tumtum replied. "Oh, no, nothing like that. Something much worse." "Gracious, have they died?" Tumtum said, looking shocked. "Oh, no, not that, but something something terrible all the same." She sat down and looked at him very solemnly. "Arthur and Lucy are going to spend the night outdoors in a tent." There she is, talking to Tumtum about what's going on. Tumtum looked relieved. Dear Nutmeg, it was just like her to make a fuss and bother about nothing. He took the lid off the serving dish and helped himself to some scrambled egg. "What's wrong? Why are you so concerned with sleeping in a tent? I'm sure they'll have a lovely time," he said. "But think about all the things that could go wrong," Nutmeg wailed. "I heard them planning everything just now when I went to borrow some butter from the kitchen, and I'm sure it will end in disaster. They're using an old tent that Arthur found in the garden shed. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it leaks." "If it rains, they can come back inside," Tumtum interrupted. "Their father is sure to leave the kitchen door unlocked for them. Now, don't look so anxious, dear. I don't see how they could come to any harm camping out in the garden on a warm spring night. Besides, we'll be able to creep out and check on them." "No, we won't," Nutmeg groaned. "That's the whole point. Oh, don't you see, Tumtum? The children have no intention of sleeping in the garden. They're going to camp by the stream." "Are you sure?" Tumtum asked. Now he looked anxious. Too, the stream ran along the bottom of the meadow behind Rose Cottage. It was at least a quarter of the mile from the house, and a quarter of a mile would seem a very long way if you were a mouse. "I am quite sure," Nutmeg said. "I heard the whole conversation. At first they were going to pitch the tent in the garden. Then Arthur suggested they go down to the stream. And of course Lucy went along with it because she thinks it will be more of an adventure. And now they seem to think they're going on a real safari. They want to light a campfire and fry sausages on it and boil a kettle to make tea." "Don't they have to be at school tomorrow?" Tumtum asked. "No, they're on break. They don't have to be back at school until Thursday." Said Tumtum. "What does their father say about it?" "Oh, you know what Mr. Mildew is like. He wouldn't notice if they stayed away for a month." Tumtum looked thoughtful. It was true that Mr. Mildew was very absent-minded. He was an inventor by trade, and he spent all day long shut away in his study inventing silver things such as grape peelers and singing key rings. He had little interest in anything other than his work. As often as not, he wouldn't even notice what time of day it was. And they would get all his meals muddled up and give Arthur and Lucy canned spaghetti for breakfast and porridge for lunch. Nutmeg was right. He would be too absorbed in his latest invention to worry about what his children were up to. "When did they plan to set off?" Tumtum asked. "This afternoon, around 4 o'clock, Nutmeg replied. "They're going to spend the morning packing." "Well, if they've made up their minds, then I can't think how we can stop them," Tumtum said. "We'll just have to hope for the best. I can't see that much will go wrong. Lucy's very responsible and—" "Hope for the best!" Nutmeg cried. I will have you know, Mr. Nutmouse, that I am not going to watch those children go off all alone across that vast meadow and then just sit here as though nothing had happened, hoping for the best. Tumtum was taken aback. Nutmeg only called him Mr. Nutmouse when she was very, very cross. Then what do you suppose we do? He asked feebly. Nutmeg started picking at the tea cozy, avoiding Tumtum's eyes. He could sense she was about to say something he wouldn't like. When she looked up, her expression was very fierce. There's only one thing for it, she said. If Arthur and Lucy are going camping, then we're going too. Chapter 2. But my dear, you don't propose we sleep outdoors? Tumtum asked nervously. He had lived all his life at Nutmouse Hall, which was an unusually grand house with tapestries and paintings and a ballroom and a billiards room and a banqueting room and just about every sort of room a mouse might want. So the thought of sleeping outdoors was very strange to him. At home, he always slept in a four-poster bed. That is exactly what I propose, Nutmeg replied. We'll follow the children to the stream and set up camp alongside them. Then at the very least we shall be on hand should any trouble arise. But we haven't got a tent, Tumtum protested. Yes, we have. General Marchmouse gave us one as a wedding present. Don't you remember, dear? And it comes with 2 inflatable mattresses, so we shall be quite comfortable. Tumtum groaned. He had forgotten all about the general's present, for their wedding had been a long while ago. He had thought it a silly present at the time, for why would he want the tent when he had a house with 17 bedrooms? He had never been camping before, and he felt sure he wouldn't like it. Now, Nutmeg said impatiently, hurry up and finish your eggs. We have a lot to do. As soon as the breakfast had been cleared away, the Nutmouses sat down at the kitchen table and made a list of all the things they would need for their expedition. Let's see, Nutmeg said, nibbling the end of her pencil thoughtfully. I shall make sausage rolls and centipede pasties and a pâté and a soup, dandelion, I think, and a walnut loaf and a ginger cake and an apple tart and a strawberry pie. And we shall need a frying pan and a kettle and a picnic china and 2 forks and 4 knives and 6 spoons. Oh, and bless me if I'm not forgetting the napkins and the salt and the pepper grinder and the folding chairs and... Hang on! We shall only be away one night, Tumtum said. Yes, but we shall be gone for supper and breakfast, and as likely as not for lunch as well, Nutmeg replied, adding a further item to her list. Supper and breakfast, and as likely as not lunch as well, Tumtum said thoughtfully. That's a lot of food, and there's the camping equipment too. How will we carry everything across the meadow? Nutmeg frowned. Tumtum was right. They would never manage it all. But then she had an idea. The children will have to carry us, she said. We can hide inside one of their satchels before they set off and hitch a lift. I shouldn't think they'll notice a few extra ounces. It'll be more than a few extra ounces, Tumtum grumbled, but he had nothing better to suggest. So when Nutmeg's list was completed, they started to get everything ready. Tumtum busied himself in the butler's pantry, filling a wicker basket with crockery, while Nutmeg bustled about in the kitchen, making delicious things to eat. If we must go camping, then we might as well do it properly, Tumtum muttered as he polished the glasses. It was past lunchtime before the Nutmouses were ready. We better get aboard the satchels, or the children might leave without us, Nutmeg said. But it's only 2 o'clock, Tumtum replied. You said they weren't going to leave until 4. Yes, but you know what humans are like. They might decide to leave on a whim. Now come on, we can't risk being left behind. Tumtum could see there was no point in arguing, so he helped Nutmeg drag everything through to the hall. Then they staggered out of their front door. Tumtum was double hauling the tent, the picnic table, the 2 folding chairs, a mass of plates and silverware. Nutmeg followed behind, heaving the hamper and the cooking pots. Tumtum locked the door behind him. Then they drudged across the broom-covered floor and through the little iron gates covering their mouse hall. On the other side of the gates lay the Mildew's kitchen and the big wooden dresser that hid the broom-covered door from view. The Nutmouses always came and went without a sound so as not to give their hiding place away. So this afternoon they closed their front gate very quietly and did not make so much as a squeak as they crept out into the dark, dusty patch beneath the dresser. Wait here. I'll check there's no one there, Tum-Tum whispered. Then he went to the edge of the dresser and poked his nose into the kitchen. The room was empty, but he could hear the children talking outside in the hallway, and he could see their satchels lying beside the garden door. They were already packed very full. One satchel even had a frying pan poking out at the very top. On the floor beside them was Arthur's wooden boat, a pretty blue yacht about the size of a man's shoe, with white sails and the name Blue Bottle written on the stern. Tum-Tum had seen the boat before. It lived in the attic of Rose Cottage, and now he supposed Arthur intended to sail it on the stream. He suddenly imagined the boat racing through the icy water, crashing over the pebbles, and he felt himself shiver. Tum-Tum had never been sailing before, and the very thought of it filled him with fear. He was glad that he and Nutmeg would be staying on dry land. He took one more look around the kitchen, standing very still and listening to the silence. He felt uneasy. He and Nutmeg usually visited Rose Cottage at night when the Mildews were asleep. It felt reckless to venture out in daylight when there was such a risk of being seen. "Come on," he whispered to Nutmeg. "The satchels are by the door. We can get in now while there's no one here." The Nutmouses lugged their things across the kitchen, beneath the towering table and chairs, but just as they were reaching the far side of the room, the floor gave a sudden tremor, and Arthur and Lucy walked in. The mice froze. They were standing at the base of the first satchel, which rose above them like a hill. In order to wriggle inside, they would have to climb to the very top, and if they did that, Arthur and Lucy would be sure to see them. The children were standing by the table. They might look around at any moment. "What shall we do?" Nutmeg trembled. She was so frightened she could hear her heart going thump. They stood there helplessly, watching the kitchen tiles, wishing the kitchen tiles would swallow them. Then Tum-Tum noticed a bulging pocket on the side of the satchel, just a couple inches above their head. "Look, we can hide in there," he said. "You go first, and I'll hand up everything to you." He hoisted Nutmeg onto the base of the satchel. Then she pulled herself up by a buckle and crawled into the pocket under the flap. A moment later, her head peeked out, her face full of anxiety. "Hurry, dear," she urged as Tum-Tum started passing her all their equipment. There seemed no end to it. First came the picnic hamper, then the table, then the 2 folding chairs. Nutmeg snatched each item hurriedly, terrified the children might look their way. "That's everything," Tum-Tum panted as he handed her the basket of crockery. Then he scrambled up the buckle and wriggled into the pocket beside her. There followed a long wait. The Nutmouses could hear the children coming and going in the kitchen, but they seemed in no hurry to set off. The pocket was pitch black and very stuffy, but the mice dared not lift the flap for fear of being seen. They sat side by side on the hamper, nervously nibbling a sausage roll. An hour or more slipped by. They started to wonder if the children had decided not to go camping after all. "Surely there couldn't be any harm if I poked my nose out, just for a second?" Nutmeg asked restlessly. "No, dear, it's too dangerous," Tum-Tum replied. And even as he spoke, the children's voices got nearer. Next thing, the Nutmouses felt themselves soaring into the air as Arthur hoisted the satchel onto his shoulder. They could not see out, and yet there were some clues as to where they were going. They heard the back door being slammed behind them as the children went outside, and then they heard the garden gate opening and shutting, and they knew they had entered the meadow. "Let's go this way," Lucy said. Then she and Arthur started walking downhill toward the stream. It was horribly bumpy in the pocket, and Nutmeg soon began to feel sick. But the children hadn't far to go, at least not by human standards, and in what seemed like no time, Lucy said, "Let's camp here." And suddenly the satchel fell to the ground with a crash. "I think we've landed," Tum-Tum said, feeling very bruised. He slowly picked himself up and peeked outside. "We're beside the stream next to the oak tree," he reported. "Come on, let's get out of here before the children find us." While Arthur and Lucy were unpacking their tent, the mice threw all their things out of the pocket, then clambered down to the ground. They felt safer now, for the grass was taller than they were. They would be well hidden. "Where shall we set up camp?" Nutmeg said. "How about just over there, under that clump of nettles?" suggested Tum-Tum. "So long as we're under stinging nettles, the children won't trample on us, and we'll still be close enough to keep an eye on them." "Good idea," Nutmeg agreed, "and we can light our campfire behind that pebble. We shall be completely hidden." So the Nutmouses heaved their things through the long grass and started setting up camp. Although Tum-Tum hesitated to admit it, Everything was very luxurious. The general's tent was well proportioned, bigger than the butler's pantry at Nutmouse Hall, and tall enough to stand in. So the Nutmouses did not have to squeeze together, as some campers do. Tumtum blew up the inflatable mattresses, and Nutmeg made up their beds with feather sleeping bags and soft pillows. Then they unfolded the picnic table and laid it with plates and glasses and silver candlesticks and damask table napkins embroidered with the Nutmouse family crest. And after that, Tumtum made a big fire out of twigs, while Nutmeg marinated some earwigs for supper, for dinner. Here they are, setting up. It was the most magnificent display of camping you have ever seen. But the children's campsite was another story. Chapter 3. Everything was going wrong for Arthur and Lucy. They had managed to erect their tent, but it looked much smaller than the one in the instructions, and it was sagging in the middle. "We can't both fit in that," Lucy said, feeling very disappointed. Arthur shrugged. "You could sleep in it. I'll sleep on the grass. It's the campfire I'm worried about. You are a dummy, Lucy, forgetting to bring the matches." "Well, don't start that again. It wasn't me who was meant to remember them. They were on your list." "No, they weren't." Lucy was about to say, "Yes, they were," but she thought better of it because then there would have been an argument, and everything really would have been spoiled. "There's no point bickering about it," she said, "but whatever happens, I'm not going back to the house to get them. If Pa sees us, he might not let us out again." Their father had seemed disapproving when they had asked him if they could go camping for the night, and at one stage they thought he might not let them. He had agreed to it in the end, and they suspected that by now he had probably forgotten they'd gone. But if they went back to the cottage to look for matches, it might start the whole thing up again. "We'll just have to make do without a fire," Lucy said. "It's very warm. It's not as though we need one." "But how will we cook supper?" Arthur asked. He had been looking forward to cooking supper all day. They had brought pots and pans and sausages and eggs and sunflower oil and even a can of macaroni and cheese. "We'll have to eat the macaroni and cheese cold, and we can have the canned peaches for dessert," Lucy said practically. Arthur made a face, imagining what cold macaroni and cheese would taste like. But then there was another disaster. "Where's the can opener?" Lucy asked, emptying both satchels onto the grass. "Don't say you've forgotten that as well." "I thought you packed it," Arthur said. "Well, I thought you packed it," Lucy replied testily. "But since neither of us packed it, I suppose we'll have to go home. If we can't open the cans, then there's really nothing to eat unless you like raw sausages." "You can go home if you like, but I'm staying here," Arthur said. He was determined to spend a night outdoors, even if it meant he had to starve. He looked very stubborn. "Oh, all right, I'll stay too," she said unhappily, for she felt it wouldn't be right to leave him on his own. "But this is the last time I'm going camping with you, ever." The Nutmouses sipped their dandelion soup, observing this unhappy scene. Nutmeg would willingly have given the children her own supper, but it would have been much too small. They could have eaten the Nutmouse's entire hamper in one bite. "Couldn't we at least get their campfire going, dear?" she asked. Children had gathered a big pile of wood from under the trees along the stream. It seemed a terrible shame it couldn't be lit. "It's too big. Our matches could never ignite branches that size," Tumtum said. And he was right, of course, for each of their matches was smaller than an ant. "But we must do something," Nutmeg went on. "We can't just sit here and watch them go without supper." "Certainly not," agreed Tumtum, who never missed a meal. But he could see this problem was not going to be easily solved. "Let's have a sautéed earwig," he suggested, for sautéed earwigs always helped him think more clearly. "All right, dear, I'll clear the soup bowls," Nutmeg said, but as she stood up, they heard a sudden bang. The children didn't hear it, for it was too quiet for human ears, but it gave the Nutmouses a tremendous fright. It sounded like a gun going off. Nutmeg clung to her chair. Her face had gone very pale. "It's probably just a field mouse out hunting," Tumtum said, trying to reassure her, but she could hear the fear in his voice too. Tumtum stood up and peered warily into the grass, unsure which direction the noise had come from. Then they heard something rustling toward them. Nutmeg heard it too and gave a shriek. Then all at once a creature sprang out in front of them and shouted, "Boo!" The Nutmouses both jumped, but they were very relieved when they saw who it was. General Marchmouse, Tumtum exclaimed. Gracious, what a fright you gave us. That was my intention, the general chuckled. I spotted you through my field glasses having a quiet little dinner out of doors, so I decided to jolly things up. Ha, ha, I thought. I shall let off my gun, then rustle up through the grass and pounce on them, shouting, boo! That'll make them jump. Nutmeg looked disapproving. She thought it a very silly prank. What are you doing out so late? She asked. I am beetle hunting, the general replied, patting his rifle. I have been out since dawn, but it's been a rotten day. I haven't shot a single bug. Anyway, he continued, sitting down in Tumtum's chair and helping himself to some soup. What are you two doing here? More to the point, babysitting from the look of things? That's right, Nutmeg said. We came to keep an eye on the children. We heard them planning a camping trip, and we didn't want to let them go out alone. But I'm afraid we haven't been much help. They need matches and a can opener, but we can't give them ours as they are much too small. The general stood up and studied the children's camp through his field glasses. What a poor show, he said disapprovingly. They're not usually like this, Nutmeg replied defensively. It's just that they forgot. Leave this to me, the general interrupted. I'll soon have things ship-shape. He took his rifle from his shoulder and stuffed it full of bullets. Then he marched toward the children's tent. The Nutmouses watched in terror, wondering what he would do. Arthur and Lucy were playing by the stream, so the general was able to approach unseen. He made first for the can of peaches, which was standing upright in the grass beside Arthur's satchels, and aimed his gun straight at it. The general had a seasoned eye, and with an immaculate volley of fire, he blasted the top right off. Tumtum and Nutmeg pressed their paws over their ears, for the gun made a dreadful din. The first round was quickly followed by a second, as the general blew open the can of macaroni and cheese. Nutmeg shrieked, but there was more to come. The general reached a hand to his belt and unclipped a grenade. General Marchmouse always carried a grenade when he went outdoors, on the basis that you never knew when a grenade-ish situation might occur. He removed the pin and took aim. Then he bowled the grenade full tilt into the children's campfire, and no sooner had he let it go than he raced for cover. There he is, blowing off the lid of the peaches. Throwing himself flat on the ground behind a tent peg, the grenade was no bigger than a raisin, but it went off with a huge bang, enough to make the Nutmouse's tent wobble. There was a brilliant burst of light as the campfire exploded into flames. When the general finally sauntered back to the dinner table, he was looking, understandably, pleased with himself. And that's our 3 chapters for today. What will happen next in the story, The Pirate's Treasure, with Tumtum, Nutmeg, and General Marchmouse, Arthur and Lucy? What will they get up to next week? Stay tuned. Nice to chat with you. Stay safe. Enjoy the weather when it's nice. And check out some of the missions in Reed Squared. There's lots of fun on there. Bye for now.